The gallery always smelled of turpentine and stale coffee, honest scents that never pretended to be anything else. Nora liked that. She liked the way the room kept its small rituals, brushes rinsed and hung, the till tucked into a drawer, the back door checked twice before she let herself go home. Tonight the rain had come in slow, steady sheets, blurring the streetlights into silver veins. She was sweeping a small pile of paint flecks when the back door clicked and a shadow filled the frame. Tomas stepped in like he belonged to the place, maybe because once he had. Rain darkened his coat, and the whiskey in his breath had sharpened the edges of the smile that used to mean dinners and easy apologies. Now it meant the kind of apology that arrived with an expectation. "Nora," he said, and the way he said her name folded itself into the room the way a net might. She kept sweeping because motion made her feel ordered. "Not tonight," she said, the sentence she'd practiced until it felt like fact. He closed the door behind him and the room shrank, the canvases seemed to lean away. "You can't just leave," Tomas said, like a fact he wished were true. Up close his jaw had a bruise someone else had left, anger meets anger in circles she'd tried to walk out of. Nora felt the old terror coil in her ribs, the memory of later apologies that never fixed the first break. She'd learned the calculus of survival: leave quietly, don't answer calls at certain hours, keep the brass key on the string in the apron pocket so the routine could anchor her. Then another figure filled the doorway, without pomp or flourish. He did not announce himself except by standing there perfectly ordinary, coat buttoned, shoes dry, no show of heroics. He offered his hand as if it were simply the thing people did in small hours with strangers. Nora's fingers closed around it before she registered the impulse was a reflex. His palm was calloused and warm. The certainty of his grip steadied something that had been wobbling for years. "Come with me," he said, voice calm and precise. Tomas laughed as if the doorway were still his stage. "Who are you?" he demanded, trying to reassert possession by volume. He stepped forward the way men who feel entitled to a woman's choices do, forward, as if space were theirs to take. The stranger turned and Nora saw a scar along one cheek, a faint line that looked like an old argument concluded badly. His eyes were a dark clarity, someone used to reading maps rather than making speeches. He met Tomas without anger. "Walk away," he said, and the two words landed like a command. Outside, under the warped light of the street lamp, a man leaned against a pole, silver on his wrist winked, a ribbon that meant allegiance in a city of quiet sigils. Nora's chest tightened. The ribbon was a small detail with a loud language, who answered to whom. In a place like this, certain marks spoke of networks, not accidents. She had always lived in a simpler ledger. Receipts, rent, paint sales, so the idea of being a line in someone else's account made her breath go thin. The stranger guided her to a waiting car, opened the passenger door with the same economy of motion he'd used on the doorstep, and slid in behind the wheel. The vehicle smelled faintly of lemon oil and leather, the clean kind of scent that suggested the space was maintained for use rather than for show. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, because asking was a small way to hold the world. He checked the rear view and the city slunk by in wet smears. "Somewhere safe for the night," he said simply. She wanted the story to be simpler, an anonymous kindness, a stranger's help. When she finally asked his name, he gave it as if it were nothing of consequence and everything: Rocco Valenti. The name had weight the way certain addresses do, a history folded into a syllable. Nora swallowed. Rocco. She'd heard the name like weather in cafes and half-whispered gossip. People lowered voices at its sound. Saying it felt like stepping into a shadow that already had shape. They drove, and the city arranged itself differently in the window panes. The rain made the world abstract, lights smeared into lines, faces into phases. In the rear view she watched Tomas talk to the ribbon man, gestures sharp as currency. She tightened her fingers on the gallery's brass key in her apron pocket until the metal bit into her palm. Small things had a way of being anchors. At the townhouse they brought her to, the rooms smelled of lemon verbena and warm bread, domestic, practiced, deliberately ordinary. Sylvia opened the door like someone who answered to routines of care, check the bruise, hand her a towel, make tea without questions. The air inside was the kind of safety that felt like a borrowed coat, comfortable for a night, not necessarily a home forever. Rocco's hand rested at the small of her back, a touch that guided rather than claimed. "Remember my name," he said before he left the threshold, each syllable practical. "If anyone asks who brought you away, tell them." She repeated it under her breath, Rocco Valenti, feeling the word settle like a talisman in her throat. She had taken a stranger's hand to escape one life. She had not expected to step into another orbit. The night had rearranged itself, a gallery she'd closed 2 hours ago, a man who had once been her world standing dripping in the doorway, and a new map traced by a name she had not chosen but now had to carry. For the first time since the door had shut on Tomas, Nora let herself breathe in a way that was no longer about preparing to run. She had been saved. Now she would have to decide what she'd do with the safety she'd been given. The townhouse smelled of lemon and warm linen, a small mercy after the rain. Sylvia moved through the kitchen with efficient care, setting a cup of tea in Nora's hands and folding a blanket across her knees. Rocco stood by the window, watching the street as if it were a ledger he had memorized. "You should sleep," Sylvia said. The tea tasted bitter and steadying. Nora curled her fingers around the mug and listened to the hush of the house. The bruise along her jaw ached in time with the kettle's last hiss. When she finally asked the question that had been nesting since the car ride in, it was blunt and small. "Why risk yourself for me?" Rocco pulled a small stack of paper from his jacket and laid the slips on the table. Bank receipts, a torn grocery note, a margin where a name had been written, Nora Grimes, beside a routing code, Route B14. He did not dramatize the discovery, he simply showed it. "Someone put your name on a page," he said. "Once a name is written, eyes follow." Sylvia filled in the shape of it. "We checked Tomas's flat," she said. "Small transfers through shell accounts. Tiny payments that look harmless until you watch them pile. Men like him get used. They carry envelopes, make small moves, then disappear from the big picture." Nora's stomach dropped in a way that sharpened her focus. Rage at Tomas rearranged itself into a narrower resolve. "So what now?" she asked. "We trace the paper," Rocco said. "We follow timestamps, phone pings, small deposits, everything becomes a map. We take the trail to a prosecutor, or we mirror the ledger to outlets that will not allow it to be scrubbed." Luca, who had been hunched over a laptop at the far table, looked up. "Public first," he said. "Ferraro is a prosecutor who knows how to follow money. We give him the chain. At the same time, I mirror the files, independent servers, sealed timestamps, trusted reporters with embargoes. If the law is compromised, we already have redundancy." Nora thought of the gallery's brass key in her apron pocket, the small ritual of closing that had once felt like safety. Now safety was a set of choices. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. "Tell us what you remember," Sylvia said. "Who he met, the cafes, the hours he kept. Small details make a trail reliable in court." Paolo added, "Routes change. We'll change yours. No patterns. No repeated stops." Rocco's voice was calm when he explained the cost. "Protection under my wing brings visibility. People who watch me watch my circle. That means fewer quiet threats, but it also means you won't disappear into anonymity. I won't sell you or trade you. But you will be on a map of a different kind." Nora set the mug down and felt the paperweight of the decision. She had not wanted drama, she had wanted a tidy exit. This was neither tidy nor obviously safe. It asked something of her, participation, testimony, risk. "I'll help," she said. "But I have terms." "Name them," Rocco said. "Transparency," she said. "Tell me what you do on my behalf. Give me a local signal if I'm in danger. If you break the rules, I walk. I won't be a bargaining chip. He listened, then nodded. Fair. We give you both oversight and an exit clause you can use. We pursue legal channels first. Ferraro will be contacted through a secure intermediary. Luca will build mirrors and distribute copies to independent repositories. If the legal path gets corrupted, the ledger will already be in places that make it costly to bury. Sylvia tapped a list into Nora's hand: Tomas's recent cafes, taxi companies, timestamps of deposits. Small patterns add up, she said. We'll stitch them into a timeline. They made plans like people who stitch a torn fabric, methodical, careful. Luca spoke in technical cadences, hashes, encryption, redundancy, each word a thin hope against erasure. Paolo mapped route changes and safe pickup points. Marta, who ran outreach programs, promised cover. The mural could be a public face and a practical distraction. Nora felt oddly calmed by the logistics. It was work, and work turned fear into action. Before she slept in the spare room they'd prepared, Rocco paused at the door. Remember my name, he said quietly. Rocco Valenti. If you must tell someone who helped, say it. She repeated it softly, Rocco Valenti, and felt the syllables sit like a talisman in her chest. Being taken from one dangerous moment had become an entry into another life where safety came with responsibilities. She closed her eyes with a fragile acceptance. She would not vanish. She would follow the paper and hold the right to step away. The ledger had found her name and, for now, she would use that ink to track the people who'd put it there. The compound sat in a quiet block, deliberately ordinary: small gardens, closed curtains, warm light in the windows. Nora woke to toast and sunlight, the kind of ordinary she hadn't allowed herself in weeks. Sylvia met her with a mug and a list of rules that sounded less like orders and more like medicine. We say them out loud, Sylvia said. Phones scrubbed. No repeating routes. Check in when you leave. If you're watched, don't engage. Come inside and tell Luca. The rules turned frantic survival into choreography. Paolo drove different routes each day. His van was a visible constancy. Marta organized the mural workshops and kept the outreach schedule steady, normalcy as camouflage. Luca, with his laptop and quick smile, taught Nora the technical side: layered feeds, tagged faces, metadata scrubs. We don't spy to control, he told her. We watch so you can breathe. Nora returned to paint because color was the language she knew best. The studio felt like a room within a room: high windows, jars of used brushes, canvases leaning like patient faces. She started with an outline of a hand. The kids arrived later in a scatter of shoes and questions. Teaching them was a ritual: mixing color, making a mark, finishing a piece. Their laughter stitched ordinary back into the day. Marta liked to call the mural an optical cover. A public art piece forces different eyes. Neighbors stop to chat, tourists take pictures. Kids run in front of cameras. The noise of normal makes mapping harder. Nora painted bandages on the hand, layered shades so a drone's autofocus would hesitate. Each layer was both practical and private. They practiced drills. Nora learned to leave the compound in different jackets and shoes. She memorized a trivial-sounding check-in code that was actually a confirmation sequence. Luca taught 3 gestures: dot, dash, cross, for different emergencies. The gestures felt absurd until they became muscle. Sylvia set Nora up with a scrubbed phone that removed metadata and routed calls through anonymizers. Paolo shuffled delivery routes to create meaningless patterns. Rocco tightened perimeter checks and denied casual access. Trust became a bureaucracy: badge scans, manual logs, rotations. The compound hummed with purpose. One afternoon Luca flagged a feed: a man had photographed the mural from the same doorway 3 times in a week. At first glance he seemed like any passerby. When Luca froze the frame, a silver ribbon gleamed at his wrist. The ribbon was a small sign with a loud language, allegiance. They changed routines overnight. Paolo altered routes, Marta shifted drop-off times, Luca seeded false metadata. For the mural opening they invited more families, arranged food stalls, and played loud music to clutter the frames. The ribbon man appeared again, predictable as a shadow, but the chaos around him made patterning unreliable. Even secured places felt tender. Nora realized safety wasn't a wall but a rhythm of people who adjusted to each other. The house's rules were a map she could read, they were stitches in a garment that could hold. Teaching kids, mixing paint, and checking cameras all felt like work towards something durable. Luca explained mapping in plain terms, how repeated angles and same hour light make a frame readable. He could see decoy frames and reroute feeds so trackers chased ghosts. Nora laughed at the absurdity, then watched as data became a shield. Marta taught Jamal to sell lemonade at the mural corner so a camera would pick up a steady stream of faces. Small measures, extra hands, crowded frames, staggered arrivals, spoiled trackers' patterns. There were also quieter anchors, communal dinners where the compound sat at long tables, sharing food and small talk so everyone learned who'd been where and when. Sylvia would check boots by the door and ask casual questions. Paolo joked to ease tension. Luca would show a quick map on his laptop and they'd nod, understanding the choreography. These mundane acts rebuilt trust that secrecy had frayed. One night Nora practiced the check-in code at 2 a.m, whispering trivia into the scrubbed phone until her voice did not tremble. When Luca pinged back a quick emoji she felt less like prey and more like part of a careful network. Rocco walked through the studio one evening and said simply, "Keep painting." Nora dipped her brush and darkened the painted bandage. The ribbon man still appeared on feeds at times, but color and noise broke the scripts. Inside, rules and anchors braided into fragile safety. It held, for now. She knew it was fragile, one misstep could undo it, but she chose to trust the routine, making small steady marks each day as acts of resistance, painting toward a life steadied, one careful breath at a time now. Tomorrow they would test another pattern. Today, she allowed herself a breath. The ledger wasn't just numbers. It was names, routes, timestamps, tiny scraps of lives that could be mapped like constellations if you knew where to look. Luca printed only a portion of it, setting the sheets on the long table where everyone gathered. Even in fragments, the pages looked heavy enough to tilt the room. "This is what Tomas carried," Rocco said. His tone was steady, but the way he kept his hand on the page felt like anchoring. "Every figure here touches something larger. Contractors, offshore shells, accounts that launder money through art, donations, even charities." Nora leaned closer, tracing the faint scrawls of handwritten codes in the margins. The letters were small, cramped, almost careless, as if whoever wrote them believed no one would dare read them. "What happens if this is real?" she asked quietly. "What happens if all of this is proved?" Sylvia answered, her voice firm but careful. "It means the money isn't just stolen. It means the networks that keep people like Tomas in motion, people who scare neighbors, who make victims disappear, they're tethered to higher ledgers. Break one chain, and the rest starts shaking." Luca spun his laptop around to show the digital copy. He had red lines connecting transactions like veins through a body. "Here," he said, tapping at a link, "this account paid a construction company in cash." That same day, the donation appeared in a cultural trust. The transfer is clean on paper, but when you check the timing, minutes apart, you see the link. Nora exhaled slowly. It was dizzying. The ledger didn't just record, it whispered. Paolo broke the quiet with a rough laugh. "They think they're clever. They're not. Clever people hide better. These ones got lazy." But Rocco didn't smile. He only shifted the pages until her name appeared, Nora Grimes, scrawled next to the code she'd seen before. "This," he said, "is why we move carefully. The moment your name sits in ink on a sheet like this, you're a potential liability. They can paint you as an accomplice, or they can silence you to erase questions. Either way, the page has power." Nora's throat tightened. Seeing her name in the ledger felt like standing under a low ceiling that might crush down at any second. "So what do we do?" Rocco laid out the forked plan again, but this time with sharper edges. "First, Ferraro. He's not perfect, but he follows evidence. If he can build a case that holds in court, we gain a legal shield. Second, Luca mirrors everything. Servers in different countries, encrypted copies with time seals, distributed to outlets that will publish if triggered. If the legal road is blocked, the public gets it all at once." "And if both fail?" Nora asked. "Then," Rocco said, "we burn it down another way." His tone made it clear he wasn't talking about fire, but reputation, leverage, the kind of quiet destruction that left scars more lasting than flames. Marta, usually soft-spoken, finally leaned in. "There's another risk," she said. "If they know this ledger is compromised, they won't wait. They'll move. Fast." The room fell into a taut silence. Nora felt the weight of choice pressing again. She had offered testimony, had promised transparency. But each step drew her further into a storm she couldn't unwalk. She studied the ledger, its faint ink and indifferent handwriting, and realized it wasn't just about proving guilt. It was about survival, hers, theirs, maybe more than that. Rocco looked at her as if reading her hesitation. "You don't have to shoulder this alone," he said. "But we do need your memory. Where Tomas met, what he said when he thought no one listened, every detail matters. It builds a thread that makes the ledger more than numbers." Nora thought back to quiet evenings when Tomas would vanish into calls, his voice lowered but careless. She remembered names muttered at the end of a bottle, addresses scribbled in the corner of receipts. Tiny pieces she had filed away without meaning to. "I'll help," she said finally. "But I won't be hidden or used." Rocco inclined his head, a small sign of respect. "Then we move together. Every page of this ledger is a shadow. We choose how much light to turn on." The meeting dissolved into motion, Luca setting encryption protocols, Marta drafting timelines for outreach, Paolo checking security routes. Sylvia stayed by Nora's side, explaining the medical risks of stress, pressing a gentle hand to her shoulder as if grounding her. Later, when the house was quiet, Nora stood at the window of her room, holding one of the printed sheets. Her name glared up at her in small black ink. She whispered it aloud, "Nora Grimes," as if reclaiming it from the page, as if saying it could make it hers again. Behind her, in the silence of his own quarters, Rocco stared at the full ledger and thought about what it meant to tether himself to someone marked on paper. He had chosen risk before, but this risk had a name he couldn't let vanish. The ledger's shadow reached them all. And from now on, every move would decide whether it swallowed them, or whether they rewrote it. The compound's rhythm had settled into something like routine, check-ins, rotations, drills, and the faint hum of Luca's laptop filling the air. For Nora, the days blurred into fragments, painting with children under Marta's supervision, practicing coded gestures with Sylvia, memorizing exit routes with Paolo. For a moment, it almost felt like safety. But safety doesn't last long when the ledger has your name. It began with a phone call. Not to Nora directly, but to the cafe where she used to work. The owner, confused, called Marta to ask why the woman with the silver scarf was receiving packages. Nora hadn't worn that scarf in months, but her stomach twisted anyway. Someone had dug up her habits, catalogued them like entries in a book. Rocco called an emergency meeting in the main room. The ledger lay between them again, but now it felt alive, pulsing with threat. "This isn't coincidence," he said. "Someone's tracing threads backward." They want to see who's tied to what page. Luca confirmed it on the screens. Our decoys are working, but there's bleed-through. Someone's testing delivery routes, probing with harmless calls and packages before they escalate. Classic patterning. Nora tried to keep her hands from shaking. So what happens next? They just, send flowers before they send bullets. Sylvia touched her shoulder. It's a warning, she said softly. They want you unsettled. Rocco leaned closer across the table, his golden eyes, harder tonight, locking onto hers. It means the ledger is striking back. But it also means we've hit something important. They wouldn't waste effort if your name was noise. Paolo growled from his corner. So we move first. But Rocco shook his head. Not recklessly. We don't win by throwing fists into the dark. We win by pulling the dark into the light. The plan shifted. Marta arranged for decoys. Friends in scarves, students carrying paint supplies, to muddy the watchers' cameras. Luca rerouted Nora's digital footprint, feeding harmless false trails into systems that mapped her old routines. Sylvia kept her steady, pressing tea into her palms when her breath quickened. But Nora couldn't shake the feeling of being hunted. Even when she painted, she caught herself glancing at the door, half expecting a shadow to break through. One evening, she stayed late in the studio, lost in the work of shading the mural's painted hand. The light had dimmed, the compound quiet except for Paolo's boots echoing on the outer walkway. Then came the noise, a crack of glass outside, small but sharp. Nora froze. Her first instinct was to run, but Sylvia's drills whispered back, "Don't flee blindly, signal." She grabbed a piece of chalk and drew a quick cross on the wall beside the door, one of the codes Luca had drilled into her. Then she ducked behind a stack of canvases, breath shallow. Seconds later, Rocco and Paolo stormed in. Rocco scanned the mark, then the room, his jaw tight. Paolo swept the outside perimeter and returned holding a brick wrapped in newspaper. He dropped it on the table with a scowl. "Old school intimidation," he muttered. Rocco unfolded the paper. The headline screamed about corruption probes, but the inside was marked with a scrawled message, "Names written can be erased." The room chilled. "They're telling you to stay quiet," Marta said grimly. "No," Rocco corrected, voice low. "They're telling us they know exactly where to press. They've seen her name in the ledger, and they want us to fear the erasure." Nora's hands clenched. "They think I'll fold. That I'll disappear before I speak. Will you?" Rocco asked, not as a challenge but as a measure. She swallowed hard, lifted her chin. "No. If they're watching, then they'll see me keep painting, keep walking, keep living. I won't be erased." For the first time, something like approval flickered in Rocco's eyes. "Then we'll give them something else to see." The next day, the compound shifted into a higher gear. Luca's mirrors went live on redundant servers. Paolo mapped exit strategies in case of a breach. Marta staged a small public event at the mural, music, stalls, families milling about, turning Nora's presence into a crowded, noisy tableau that no sniper could parse cleanly. And when the ribbon man appeared again at the edge of the crowd, camera raised, Nora didn't flinch. She dipped her brush in cobalt blue, raised her hand, and painted another layer on the mural, her movements steady, deliberate. "Let him watch," she thought. "Let him write my name again. I won't be erased." That night, when the compound gathered, Rocco set the brick back on the table. "This was their first strike," he said. "It won't be the last. But remember, first strikes are also tells. They've revealed themselves. They've chosen intimidation over silence. That means they're worried." Nora met his gaze across the table. For the first time since Tomas, she didn't feel like a victim caught in someone else's shadow. She felt like a player, holding a brush in one hand and a choice in the other. "They should be," she said quietly. The ledger's shadow had reached for her. She had answered back. The compound had rules, rhythms, anchors. But after the brick, after the message scrawled in newsprint, everyone moved with an edge of tension. The laughter at communal dinners came softer. The drills became sharper. Nora felt it most in the silence between her footsteps, each echo a reminder that she was still being hunted. Rocco doubled security. Paolo switched to unpredictable rotations, sometimes circling the block twice before parking. Luca stayed awake past dawn, feeding lines of code into his servers, muttering about packet leaks and mirrored trails. Even Sylvia, steady as stone, began carrying a first aid satchel everywhere she went. For Nora, the hardest part wasn't the rules. It was the waiting. Waiting for the next strike. Waiting to see how far the ledger's shadow would reach. One night she stood in the studio, staring at the mural's painted hand. She'd meant for it to be a symbol of healing, the bandages layered in hopeful colors. But under dim light, the hand looked bruised, almost grasping. She wondered if that was what she had become, something caught between healing and being broken. The next morning brought no brick, no phone call, no obvious threat. Instead, it brought something worse. Ferraro. He was the prosecutor Rocco had mentioned, known for chasing financial crimes with dogged persistence. But when he arrived at the compound, stepping out of a modest car with a folder under his arm, Nora felt unease stir in her chest. Ferraro greeted Rocco with a curt nod, but his gaze lingered on Nora a moment too long. "So this is the name in the ledger," he said flatly. "The one they've already tried to rattle." Nora bristled. "I'm not just a name." Rocco's hand brushed the table, a small warning to Ferraro. "She's a witness," he said. "And her testimony makes the ledger more than numbers." Ferraro sat, flipping the folder open. "Witnesses are fragile. Ledgers are not. You put the two together, and the fragile part usually breaks first." The room chilled. Luca leaned forward. "We've mirrored everything. If you think burying this is safer, you're wrong. The data will surface whether you take it or not." Ferraro's eyes narrowed, studying Luca as if weighing his resolve. Then he turned back to Rocco. "You want me to take this to court? Fine. But understand what that means. The moment I file, discovery opens. Their lawyers will know her name officially. Intimidation becomes prosecution. Are you ready for that storm?" Nora's pulse hammered. She thought of the cafe, of Tomas's sneer, of the brick on the table. She thought of being erased. Then she said, "Steady, if my name's already in their ledger, then it may as well be in the courts." Ferraro's gaze sharpened, measuring her. "Braver than most," he muttered. "But bravery doesn't keep bullets away." Sylvia's hand found Nora's shoulder, firm. Neither does silence. The meeting ended with no promises, only conditions. Ferraro would test the ledger, cross-check accounts, see if the evidence could survive court. In the meantime, he warned, the other side would not wait. He was right. That evening, while Marta supervised kids painting in the square, a black car idled too long at the corner. When Paolo approached, it sped away, leaving behind only the smell of exhaust and a slip of paper tucked under a bench. Rocco read it aloud in the kitchen. "The girl talks, the walls fall." Everyone froze. Nora's hands shook, but she forced them steady. "So they're afraid of me. Or they want you to think you're the weak point," Luca countered. Rocco's expression hardened. "Either way, the message is clear. They've moved past warnings. They're preparing to break the wall." That night, the compound's silence was heavier than usual. Nora lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying Ferraro's words, "Witnesses are fragile." Maybe he was right. Maybe she was the crack they tried to widen until everything collapsed. But then she remembered the mural. The hand wasn't broken. It was wrapped. Protected. Healing. She whispered into the dark, "I won't break." Across the hall, Rocco sat at his desk, ledger open before him. He heard her words through the thin walls. For the first time in years, something like hope flickered behind his scarred composure. The ledger had its shadows, but Nora had given him something the shadows couldn't erase: defiance. And for Rocco Valenti, defiance was the most dangerous weapon of all. The first sound was faint, just the scrape of metal against metal. Nora woke instantly, heart pounding, because in the compound even small sounds carried meaning. She sat up in the dim guest room, straining her ears. Another scrape, then a low click, like a lock resisting. Someone was at the gate. Within seconds, the quiet erupted. Paolo's boots thundered down the corridor. Luca's voice came through the intercom, clipped and urgent: "North fence, breach attempt." Sylvia pulled Nora from bed, thrusting a jacket around her shoulders. "Stay close. Don't argue." They had drilled for this, safe house rules recited like prayers, but drills were different from reality. Nora's pulse raced as Sylvia ushered her toward the reinforced room at the center of the compound. The heavy door loomed ahead. But before they reached it, Rocco appeared, gun in hand, his presence sharp as a blade. "Not the panic room," he ordered. "They want us scattered. Stay with me." Outside, the night broke open with the sound of boots hitting pavement and the hiss of suppressed gunfire. Shadows moved along the north wall, 3, maybe 4 intruders, slipping like smoke. Luca's monitors flickered with grainy feeds, masked men cutting wires, testing blind spots. "They're professional," Luca muttered, fingers flying over the keyboard. "No chatter on comms, no lights. They know where the cameras are." "Then they know whose house this is," Rocco said grimly. He chambered around and motioned Paolo to the side entrance. Nora wanted to hide, wanted to run, but her feet rooted to the floor. The ledger had brought this storm straight to her. She wasn't just a name in ink anymore, she was a target. Rocco noticed her trembling hands. "Breathe," he said, his tone low, commanding. "Fear is fine. Silence is fatal. If you see something, say it. Understand?" She nodded quickly, forcing air into her lungs. The first intruder breached the courtyard wall. Paolo moved like a shadow, tackling him before his boots fully hit the ground. A scuffle, a muffled grunt, and the man went still. But 2 more slipped past, fast, heading for the studio. Nora's heart lurched. The mural. The kids' paintings. That space had become her anchor, her proof of normalcy. She couldn't bear to see it torn apart. Rocco saw her glance and understood. "Stay behind me," he said, moving toward the studio door. Inside, moonlight slanted across canvases. The intruders moved between them, black-clad, weapons drawn. One rifled through supplies, the other scanning walls as if looking for hidden compartments. They weren't here for art. They were searching for the ledger's fragments. Looking for something? Rocco's voice cut through the dark. Both men spun. The silence shattered with gunfire. Nora ducked instinctively, her hands over her head, paint jars exploding around her. Rocco fired back, precise, controlled. One man dropped, the other staggered but kept moving. Nora's wolf, buried instincts of fight or flight, surged inside her. Before she thought, she grabbed the nearest object, a heavy jar of solvent, and hurled it. The glass shattered against the intruder's arm, sending him stumbling sideways into Rocco's shot. Silence fell again, broken only by Nora's ragged breathing. Her hands shook, flecked with paint and glass. Rocco's gaze locked on her, golden eyes fierce but steady. Good, he said. Just one word, but it steadied her more than she expected. By the time dawn broke, the compound smelled of gunpowder and burnt wires. The intruders lay bound, waiting for Ferraro's people to collect them. Luca replayed footage, his jaw tight. They weren't amateurs. They knew our weak points. Which means, Rocco said, someone fed them details. The word hung heavy, betrayal. Nora sat on the steps, blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She replayed the moment she'd thrown the jar, the sound of glass breaking, the shock of realizing she had fought back. She was no longer just surviving. She was resisting. Rocco approached quietly, crouching to meet her eyes. You did well tonight. You saw, you acted, you survived. That's what matters. Her voice trembled. They'll come again, won't they? Yes, he said, honest as stone. But next time, we'll be ready. For the first time, Nora believed him. The breach hadn't broken the wall. It had shown them where to reinforce. And it had shown her that she wasn't as fragile as she feared. The ledger's shadow was still there. But now, she carried fire in her hands. The breach had left cracks, some in the walls, others in the people. The compound was patched, cameras reset, fences reinforced, but trust was harder to mend. Someone had leaked details, someone had drawn the intruders straight to their doors. Rocco gathered everyone in the kitchen that morning. The table was littered with coffee mugs and fragments of the night's chaos, broken glass, a spent shell casing Paolo had kept as a reminder. The silence was heavy until Rocco broke it. There was betrayal, he said plainly. No one else could have known the blind spots but us. We find the leak, or this house falls. Eyes flicked around the table. Marta crossed her arms, Luca's fingers tapped nervously, Sylvia stood with her jaw tight. Nora sat between them, her pulse racing. She hated the way suspicion turned allies into strangers. Luca finally spoke. We've all shared this roof. If one of us talked, it wasn't casual. It was deliberate. Paolo growled. Then we flushed them out. Rocco shook his head. No rash moves. If you accuse without proof, you fracture trust further. We watch, we test, we wait. The day stretched with tension. Nora tried to paint, but the brush slipped in her hand. Every creak of the floor made her glance over her shoulder. She wasn't used to this, the gnawing doubt that someone at her side might be sharpening a knife behind their back. That evening, Ferraro returned. His suit was rumpled, his eyes tired, but his folder thicker. He set it down heavily. The ledger's threads check out, he said. Shell companies, fake contracts, donations, all traceable. With testimony, we can make this stick. Testimony, Sylvia repeated. From Nora. Ferraro nodded. But that means exposure. Her name will be on record, her face in hearings. You've already had a breach, can you protect her if they escalate? The question landed like a stone in the middle of the room. Rocco answered without hesitation. Yes. But Nora wasn't sure. She thought of the intruders in the studio, of the brick, of the black car that had idled too long. If my name goes public, they'll come harder, she said. Ferraro didn't flinch. They already are. The only way out is through. Sunlight makes shadows retreat. The plan sharpened. Nora would give a preliminary statement, coded under protection orders. The ledger would be sealed into official evidence, mirrored across Luca's servers as backup. But even as Ferraro outlined the steps, Nora felt unease coil in her gut. Trust was already fragile. If someone inside had betrayed them once, what would stop them from doing it again, this time with her testimony on the line? That night, unable to sleep, Nora wandered into the courtyard. The air smelled of rain. She found Rocco there, leaning against the wall, cigarette unlit in his hand. "Do you trust them?" she asked softly. He didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "I trust their skills. But trust of the heart, that's earned every day. Betrayal doesn't erase loyalty, but it stains it." Nora shivered. "So what do we do?" "We keep moving," he said simply. "Loyalty reveals itself in fire. You saw it in yourself during the breach, you acted, you stood. That's loyalty. The others will show their lines too. We just have to watch which way they bend." She studied him in the dim light. For all his scars, for all his iron edges, there was something unyielding in the way he carried weight for everyone else. "And you?" she asked. "Where do your lines bend?" Rocco's golden eyes met hers, steady, unwavering. "Toward the people I've chosen to protect. And now that includes you." The words settled in her chest like both a comfort and a chain. The following day, a new sign appeared. Luca intercepted a data ping, an anonymous signal sent toward the compound's network. It carried no message, just a symbol, a silver ribbon. The same mark worn by the watcher at the mural. "They're testing us again," Luca muttered. "Probing to see if we react." Rocco ordered silence. No response, no trace. "Let them think we're blind," he said. "Better to watch the watchers." But inside, everyone felt the tension twist tighter. Lines of loyalty were being drawn, invisible but sharp. Soon, they'd know who was standing with them, and who was standing against. And Nora realized, with a clarity that both frightened and steadied her, once her testimony went public, there would be no room for doubt. The cracks would either mend into steel, or split wide enough to bring the walls down. The courthouse loomed like a slab of stone, its steps slick from a morning rain. Nora stood at the base of them, her palms damp despite Sylvia's steadying hand on her elbow. For weeks she had whispered her vow, "I won't be erased," but standing here, with the ledger pages sealed in Ferraro's folder, it felt less like a vow and more like a dare. Rocco flanked her on one side, Paolo on the other. Their presence was iron, but Nora still felt the stares of strangers slicing through her coat. Reporters lingered at the bottom of the steps, cameras lifted like weapons. One shouted her name. She froze. Rocco leaned down, voice low enough for her alone. "Keep walking. They only own you if you stop." She inhaled and climbed. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old wood. Ferraro guided them to a small chamber, away from the grand courtroom. This was preliminary, closed doors, sealed transcripts, just enough to plant the first legal root. Still, the weight of it pressed heavy. Ferraro set the ledger on the table. "Say your name for the record," he instructed. Her throat tightened. "Nora Grimes." The clerk typed it, each keystroke loud. Nora imagined the sound echoing out into the city, each click an invitation for danger. But she pushed through, answering Ferraro's careful questions, Tomas's habits, the strange calls, the way receipts and scraps of paper had piled up with code she hadn't understood until now. "Did you recognize the name Valenti before tonight?" Ferraro asked. Nora glanced at Rocco. His golden eyes were steady, unreadable. "Yes," she admitted. "But not the way they did. Not as leverage. He's the one who pulled me out." Ferraro didn't react, just noted it. "Do you believe your life is in danger because of this ledger?" "Yes." Her voice was steady now. "But I'd rather be in danger for telling the truth than erased for staying silent." The words hung in the room. Even the clerk paused before typing. When it ended, Ferraro gathered the files. "We have enough to open an inquiry. They'll try to stall, bury, intimidate. But this puts them in the light." Outside, the reporters swarmed again. Questions flew. "Who are you protecting? What names are in the ledger? Did you testify against Tomas's people? But Nora kept walking, chin lifted. She didn't answer. She didn't bow. Halfway down the steps, a single shout cut through the noise. You should have stayed quiet, Nora. The crowd hushed for a heartbeat. Nora froze, scanning faces, but the speaker had vanished into the blur. Rocco's hand pressed against her back. Keep moving. They reached the car. Paolo slammed the door shut behind them, his jaw tight. That was no reporter, he muttered. Luca confirmed it later, reviewing footage on his laptop. The man had worn no press badge, carried no camera. Just slipped in, delivered the threat, and disappeared. They wanted her rattled, Sylvia said. They wanted her marked, Rocco corrected. The compound that night was silent, tension hanging like storm clouds. Nora sat in the studio, staring at the mural. By lamplight, the painted hand looked stronger now, the bandages glowing like silver armor. She dipped her brush and added another layer, steady strokes that calmed her pulse. Rocco entered quietly, watching her paint. You spoke well today, he said. I shook the whole time, she admitted. He shook his head. Courage isn't absence of fear. It's walking anyway. And you walked. She set the brush down, turning to face him. Do you think it will matter? One testimony? One ledger? His gaze softened, rare and fleeting. It already matters. Because you proved they can't erase you. Nora wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe the ledger was just paper and ink, that it couldn't reach beyond walls and shadows. But deep down, she knew the men who had sent bricks and bullets weren't finished. That night, as she lay awake, a strange calm settled in her chest. They would come again. She was certain of it. But she was no longer just a name in someone else's ledger. She was a voice in the record, a witness under oath. And that made her dangerous. The compound never fully slept after the testimony. Every creak was checked, every shadow logged, every signal traced. Yet despite the vigilance, Nora sensed it, something building, waiting to break. It came 3 nights later. She was in the studio, finishing the last detail on the mural's hand, when Luca burst through the door, pale and breathless. They're moving, he gasped. Caravan of black vans, unmarked plates, heading this way. They're not probing this time. They're coming to finish it. The house snapped to life. Paolo armed the gates, Sylvia prepped the infirmary, Marta gathered the children and hustled them to the safe room. Luca pulled up maps on his laptop, tracing the van's approach like storm clouds. Rocco loaded his weapon calmly, as though he'd known this night was inevitable. He looked at Nora. Stay in the inner circle. Her chest tightened. No. I won't hide while everyone else bleeds for me. His golden eyes burned. This isn't about pride. This is survival. She lifted her chin, defiant. Then survival means standing together. For a moment, silence. Then a shadow of a smile touched his mouth. Stubborn, he muttered. Fine. But you follow my lead. The van screeched to a halt outside. Masked men poured out, weapons glinting in the moonlight. Floodlights snapped on, bathing the compound in harsh white. The first shots cracked the air. Paolo returned fire from the wall, his booming curses echoing. Luca triggered decoys, alarms, fake signals, automated lights, throwing the intruders into confusion. Sylvia pulled the wounded back as quickly as they fell. Nora crouched in the studio doorway, her wolf instinct screaming, her body trembling. But she didn't run. She tore strips of cloth, bound a soldier's arm, pressed her hands to wounds until Sylvia took over. Through the chaos, she saw Rocco, moving like a storm, every shot precise, every command sharp. He was more than a man in those moments, he was the wall itself, holding back the dark. But the dark pressed harder. One intruder slipped past the defenses, heading straight for the studio. Nora's breath caught. She grabbed the nearest object, a metal rod used for stretching canvas, and swung as he lunged. The crack echoed, and he collapsed at her feet. Her hands shook, but she didn't freeze. She dragged his weapon across the floor, out of his reach, and called for Paolo. Her voice was raw, but it carried. Hours felt like minutes, minutes like lifetimes. By dawn, the vans were gone, the intruders scattered or captured. The courtyard reeked of smoke and gunpowder. Wolves limped, but the compound still stood. Rocco strode through the wreckage, his coat torn, blood streaking his cheek. He looked at Nora, his gaze heavy with exhaustion and something else, something fierce, unspoken. "You fought," he said simply. "So did all of you," she replied, her throat tight. "But they'll come again. Won't they?" "Yes," he admitted. Then his voice dropped lower, softer. "But next time, you won't just be a target. You'll be my ally." Ferraro arrived later with armed escorts, shock etched into his face at the scene. This isn't intimidation anymore," he said, surveying the captured men. "This is war. But the testimony, the ledger, your evidence, now has weight it didn't before. We'll bring this into the light. I swear it." For once, Nora believed him. Because the shadows had tried to erase her, and they had failed. That evening, the compound gathered in the courtyard. The mural loomed behind them, the painted hand bandaged but unbroken, bathed in the silver glow of the moon. Nora stood beside Rocco, her shoulders aching, her spirit raw but unbowed. She thought of the girl she had been weeks ago, closing a cafe alone, clutching a brass key as if it meant safety. That girl had vanished the moment she grabbed a stranger's hand. Now, she was something else entirely. A witness. A fighter. A name that refused to be erased. Rocco's voice carried across the courtyard, low but firm. They wanted to erase us. Instead, we stand. He looked at Nora then, his gaze steady, claiming. And we will not fall. Nora's chest swelled with something she hadn't felt in years, belief. In herself, in them, in the fragile, stubborn light they were keeping alive. The ledger's shadow still lingered, but she no longer feared it. Because shadows only exist when light burns behind them. And now, she was the light.